Today we're talking about two different sets of changes. First, we have updated patch notes or changes to the patch notes of the current PTS. We are going to go through the changes only, not everything, just what has been changed because it's all listed here. And we're going to discuss that. And then in combination with that, we also have a dev Q&A that took place yesterday. And I'm going to summarize that for you as well, because there's a lot of other information regarding Season 7, regarding changes or changes that didn't happen. And we're going to go into all that. But let's begin with the changes that we have right here that have been introduced to PTS today. The first one is to Bastet. Bastet's new abilities look very successful in PTS so far, but most likely too successful, as she gains significant AoE and a new form of CC, so damage needs to be removed. This occurred through her passive, but was not a sufficient shift. She's seeing a few more damage decreases to even out her new design. On one hand, we have a nerf to Pounce, from 80 base damage to 340 to 80 to 300. So the scaling doesn't go up quite as much. I think that one is acceptable. I think that one is fair. I can see that because with the multiple cats sleeping in, I don't quite see why it needs to do that much damage. The other one is to Razor Whip. Decrease the base damage from 30 to 110 per tick to 30 to 90 per tick, meaning a total of 120 to 440 to 120 to 360. This nerf I consider very heavy-handed, mainly because I think Razor Whip is already kind of weakened compared to many other abilities due to the fact that it's a dot. So you can Aegis it, you can counter it in many different ways, and it's meant to have more damage because it takes longer than most other abilities. I see that it needed a nerf, but I think an 80 base damage nerf is very extreme. I don't recall the last time we saw an 80 base damage nerf on the ability. And I personally think that the nerf should rather be shifted towards the scaling of the ultimate so that multiple instances of this don't go so over the top than nerfing this ability every time it's being used. This might actually affect her levering order and stuff as well. I'm not entirely sure yet. But yeah, this one's, I think, a bit too heavy-handed because I played against Bastet a few times now and I think she is towards the stronger end for sure. I think she's not a weak goddess by any chance. But compared to, say, Odin, for example, I think she's not completely brutally overwhelming, at least from what I've seen so far. Maybe I haven't seen her full potential yet, but yeah, I think nerfing her base damage in total by 120 may have been a bit over the top. But we'll see how things develop. There might just be buffs later again. Odin gets his Gungnir's Might nerfed. That's less surprising. Decreased base damage per pulse from 45 to 125 to 35 to 115. Decreased physical power scaling per pulse from 30 to 20%, and it decreased physical power scaling on throw from 75 to 65%. Compared to Bastet, I am actually surprised that he only got such a small nerf. He loses 30 base damage in total, and then 30% scaling on the tick parts and 10% scaling on the other parts, so a total of 40% scaling. So the scaling nerfs, yeah, that's significant. So it puts them down a little bit more in later stages of the game. But the base damage, I think, is still incredibly high, considering that one tick is still almost a single swing of the ability beforehand. You get 3 ticks and the throw afterwards. So his single target damage, especially in early game where base damage is very relevant, is going to be much, much higher than before still. So I'm expecting more nerfs to Odin, and I think the 3 is what's going to get targeted more. Achilles, I'm going to read this out real quick because I think a lot of people are wondering about this one. From the update notes, it was clear that the Achilles changes was not sufficient. The change was not sufficient. Achilles is a top pick right now, and although the power decrease we have already shipped was impactful, we are willing to nerf him more. We were hesitant to over-nerf characters when the meta might nerf them as well, but we need Achilles to move down a bit further to make room for more gods to test in this new Season 7 meta. So he was clearly still very strong. The combat dodge is getting nerfed, decreased the damage from 50 to 210 to 50 to 190. So 20 of one hit of this, but you can have 2 hits of that, so 40 of this ability, which is quite a lot. And Radiant Glory decreased the healing from 24 to 40 to 20 to 32. So that one I'd say is a bit more targeted towards solo. Overall, Hyris addressed Achilles a little bit later in the Q&A, so we'll get back to Achilles a little more. I think this change is understandable though. And the next one is, in my opinion, just as understandable. Susano did not get a nerf, and that was surprising to many, and I think they were kind of expecting that maybe he would fall off with the changes anyways. He said that he received multiple scaling nerfs recently. So yeah, they're trying to see if he would fall off naturally, but it's safe to say, from what I've seen of Susano on PTS so far, you just push your buttons and you do a ton of damage, and it works way too well for him at the moment. You don't really need to put in any effort. And therefore he is getting nerfs. Again, this is to Jetstream, decreased physical power scaling per tick from 30 to 25%, and increased cooldown after teleporting to an enemy from 8 seconds to 10 seconds. I am a bit surprised that they didn't touch the 1 a little bit, the 3 instead, but I'm fine with either. I think his damage numbers just need to go down to give it more counterplayability. And I also can definitely see the second part here. I think this is the more important part, that his mobility is slightly decreased, making him a little less slippery. Conquest blue buff, that one did not go over too well. Increased MP5 per 10% of missing mana from 2 MP5 to 3 MP5. So this used to be 20 MP5 apparently, and it is now going from 20 MP5 if you basically have no mana left to 30 MP5 when we have no mana left. So overall it's still going to be less MP5, but it's going to be a little bit more than in the initial nerf stage. I still think that blue buff being nerfed is risky, because it may very well mean that we see a heavy Mystical Maya meta. It may also very well mean that we see something crazy coming back like ADCs in solo, because they don't rely as much on the mana. So, or everyone's playing Chalk, whatever. So in either scenario here, I think this is not done yet. I think this is still a very low amount in comparison. And we'll have to see what exactly will happen with that in the long run. Dynasty Playtime has its cost increased from 1,400 to 1,600. This is so that it cannot be bought right away at the start of the game, which is interesting because they made that accessible, and they made that accessible for tier 2 Road of Tahuti as well, but for Dynasty they don't want this super early defense, especially for solo laners as well, I guess. Tyrannical Playtime is very, very strong at the moment, is definitely overperforming, and that is getting some nerfs. So first of all, there's a description error that was listing at a 10% minion attack speed rather than the actual 20%. So it's actually going to have a 20% minion attack speed increase. But it is no longer going to have a 20% health bonus increase, and it will instead have 10% of that. So 20% attack speed, 10% health for minions. Also, the cost is increased from 2,400 to 2,600, making it a little less attractive as the first item that you're going to rush in solo. And it also has the magical power decreased from 85 to 70, so just taking a bit of that pressure off, especially after the wave is cleared and you get that extra power as well. Overall, very understandable changes. This item was released very strong. Stone of Fel had its magical power decreased from 100 to 80. They just don't want to put too much power on mixed bruisers, tank items. And I think that's understandable. At the same time, I have to say that Stone of Fel is one of those items where so far I felt like I'm not entirely sure if that many gods are using it, with the exception of Umoja. Umoja is mentioned here, by the way. I asked about Umoja, and they said her pick, ban, and win rate stats are not nearly as high as Susano Achilles, but she is definitely being watched closely, though. So that answers my question about Umoja, because they are already, looking at her closely, because she's performing very well in the hands of skilled players, I would say. I think that's a big difference. With Susano, for example, you don't need skill at the moment. You used to once upon a time, but right now you can just smash buttons. With Umoja, you still need to somewhat understand what you're doing. Hide of the Nemean Lion. This one is crazy. Increased physical protection from 70 to 75, minor increase, but still a super high prot item, but decreased damage reflected from 25% to 15%. This is basically the same base rate that lifesteal items have for the most part, though it doesn't work quite the same way because how protections are factored in. But I think this is going to take Nemenian down significantly, and I am very surprised about this change. I did not expect this change. They want to make the pool of hunters that you can play bigger, but I don't really see... I see Nemean on tanks, of course, but I don't really see Nemean in general that much that I think, yeah, this is super strong and we need to specifically take out... I don't know. Maybe this is something to get crit more into the meta, but I think there are cleaner ways to do that. Yeah, I really don't get this one. Maybe there's more behind this than we know. Maybe they saw something on PTS that they don't want to talk about, so people don't abuse it. But this one is the strangest one to me. And, well, I guess it's going to push Mystical Mail even more in solo because Nemean is less attractive. Warrior's Bane and Titan's Bane get their nerfs reverted. So the base pen here is again, base. Why does it still say protection reduction? That is so confusing to me. It should be percentage penetration. It says protection reduction on both, but here it says penetration. Anyways, this is going up from 10 to 15% again at the lower end, and then going up from 35 to 40 at the higher end. And I think this is very necessary because otherwise Void Shield would be the much more appealing option in many situations. And they also didn't want to nerf hunters this way. We will go over that a little bit more detail in the Q&A section because they can address that. And Execution has the same treatment here, with the physical protection reduction being increased again from 10% to 12%, also the previous values. I think especially Titan's Bane is necessary. I think Execution losing a little bit would not have been the worst thing to happen, but apparently a lot of Hunter players were very upset. And the last one is Rage. Decreased cost from 2,400 to 2,300 and increased the crit chance per stack from 2 to 3%. This is likely going to be huge because it's already the best single crit DPS item. It's not the best burst crit item because Deathbringer gives you more damage, but it's the best single crit DPS item. And the crit chance being increased significantly is going to be very interesting, and I will look into that in more detail and break down Hunter builds in a future video, but I can definitely say that this may not sound like much because it's just, it sounds like 1% here, but because it is per stack, it should be very impactful. It's a lot more crit chance. And while making this video, I had to realize that it became a little bit long-ish already, so I'm gonna cut this part off here, and this is going to be just a summary of the patch notes, and we're going to talk about the Dev Insight in a separate video. So those of you who are actually interested in the more detailed things can check out the Dev Insight. And this is more the basic summary of the patch notes itself, or the new changes itself. So with that, at this point, thank you guys very much for watching. And if you're new to the channel, feel the sub button and maybe the bell, so you get the updates for the Dev Insight or something else that I want to talk about in regards to new stats on the new map and everything. There's going to be a lot. And other than that, see you for the next one later, because I'm going to upload the second part later. Duke Sloth, out.